Good evening. There we go. Yeah. Hello, hello. Tammy sang that at my uncle's funeral. It was really pretty. What'd those men say to you after the service? Do you remember? These two men came up to her after the service that were, I guess they were a music minister at another church, and they said, "Can you come to our church and sing that?" She said, "Well, I play the piano at my church every Sunday." They said, "Oh, rats." Well, Sunday, we're going to eat right after the morning service. We're going to have turkey, ham, and chicken for the meat. And they have rolls, right, Tam? So you just bring everything else, whatever else, all the good stuff. Sweet tater pie, all that stuff, whatever. But yeah, that's happening Sunday. And then after the meal, I'll give us another message. It'll be a light one because most people after they eat don't last too long. But I'll have a few things here. You know, I was studying this morning something really. I set out an old book that I hadn't read probably for 20 years, and anyway, it's a wonderful book on the power of the blood of Christ, partly, and I think I'm going to preach that on Sunday. As far as there's one section in there that he talks about. It's a book by R.A. Torrey, but he talks about how thankful we should be for the blood, and he gives some examples. It's really a good thing. So hopefully the Lord will help me with that. But be here for Sunday. That's going to be a great time together, and should be a blessing. And then choir practice will resume not this Sunday but next Sunday, and 4:15 hands choir practice. You might want to start practicing. You might want to practice beforehand. Oh yeah, 4 o'clock. We moved it up. But anyway, so that's coming up as well. Then we'll have the Christmas program. And let me just throw this out. I usually read the coconut story, but I think I'm going to read something different this year. It's called, I'm not going to tell you what it's called. I'll tell you. It's called The Mud Bath Story. It's not anywhere near as long as the coconut story, but it is a moving story. And I'm really considering reading that for us on the probably the Sunday night after the program. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, you'll be blessed by either story for sure. Yeah. Hot wassels. That's how you say waffles if you can't say it right. Yes, hot wassels. Yes. And I'll tell you what, that cookie exchange last year, oh, that was so good. I don't know. Some people know how to make cookies, but yeah, that was awesome. So yeah, that's coming up. Well, hello, Brett. How are you? You came back in town, huh? Our calendars, did they ever get printed? They did? Okay, good. So do we have calendars back there now? Somebody said no or yes? I didn't see any either. Yeah, I looked. I didn't see any. So we're going to get those calendars out. So is Cookie Exchange on there? Yeah. Is Cookie Exchange on there? Yeah. Britt just shook her head. That means she's going to go and type a new one that says Cookie Exchange. Yeah. Yeah, very good. So today's Streams in the Desert. Oh, and let me just throw this out too, just to let you know. I haven't always read streams or hymn stories on Wednesday night, just so you know that. Sometimes I would read stuff about the people today that are being martyred, stories about that. What is that? Voice of the Martyrs, missionary stories, whatever. So I may hear, next year or so, I may transition to something else, just to let you know. But whatever it is, they're usually very interesting and a blessing. Today's stream is November 13th, and it comes from Genesis 18. It says, I know him, that he will command his children. God wants people that he can depend upon. He could say of Abraham, I know him, that he will command his children, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken. God can be depended upon, and he wants us to be just as decided, as reliable, as stable. This is just what faith means. God's looking for men on whom he can put the weight of all of his love and power and faithful promises. God's engines are strong enough to draw any weight we attach to them. Unfortunately, the cable which we fasten to the engine is often too weak to hold the weight of our prayer. Therefore, God is developing us, disciplining us to stability and certainty in the life of faith. Let us learn our lessons and stand fast. And here's how he ends this. He says, God knows that you can stand that trial. He wouldn't have given it to you if you could not. It is his trust in you that explains the trials of life. The trials of life. However bitter they may be, God knows your strength, and he measures it to the last inch. And a trial was never given to any man that was greater than that man's strength through God to bear it. Isn't that good? You know, I thought about what I preached on Sunday night, and I didn't do that justice. But I tell you, that is such a beautiful passage of Scripture in Romans 5 that explains why God allows those trials. All righty, well, there you go, Dennis. Yes. Yeah. I'm like, what date did I select? It's November 21st, I remember. Yeah, we're going to look at Great is Thy Faithfulness. Now, I told you in Thanksgiving, in this particular hymn storybook, there's a lot of hymns that we just don't sing in the Baptist church. I'm sure other churches sing them somewhere. There's a few, though, in the last week that I read that I could have read. But this one is interesting to me. Just the story is kind of interesting. And I think it's page 109 in your hymnal. And it's from the scripture verse is from Lamentations. But you know, I recently read through Lamentations, and that's such a sad. It's a sad lament. Lamentations 3:22. It's of the Lord's mercies that we're not consumed, because His compassions fail not. Well, I like that. And so it writes here, one of the important lessons to the children of Israel, which they had to learn during their wilderness journey, was that God's provision of manna for them was on a morning by morning basis. They couldn't survive on old manna, nor could it be stored for future use. We ought to chew on that for a minute. No pun intended. But we should think about that. While many enduring hymns are born out of a particular dramatic experience, this was simply the result of the author's morning by morning realization of God's personal faithfulness in his daily life. Shortly before his death in 1960, Mark's not here tonight, and I was going to tell him, Mark, yeah, it's contemporary, 1960. Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. The streams too? Mm-hmm. His name is Thomas Chisholm. It says, he wrote, "My income's never been large at any time due to impaired health in the earlier years, which has followed me on until now. But I must not fail to record here the unfailing faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God, and that He has given me many wonderful displays of His providing care, which have filled me with astonishing gratefulness." Isn't that beautiful? Hey, that's just a blessing. So, you know, we could just sum that up by saying, God's never failed me. He's always taking care of me. Thomas Obadiah Chisholm was born in a crude log cabin in Franklin, Kentucky. From his humble beginning and without the benefit of high school or advanced education, he somehow, it's almost humorous to say this, he somehow began his career as a school teacher. At the age of 16, in the same country school where he had received his elementary training. After accepting Christ as Savior, he became the editor of the Pentecostal Herald and later was ordained as a Methodist minister. Throughout his long lifetime, Mr. Chisholm wrote more than 1,200 sacred poems, many of which have since become prominent hymn texts. And so here's Great is Thy Faithfulness. He writes, here's the poem, "Great is Thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There's no shadow of turning with Thee. Thou changest not. Thy compassions, they fail not. As Thou hast been, Thou forever wilt be. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to Thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, Thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is Thy faithfulness. Great is Thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed Thy hand hath provided. Great is Thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me." That's just beautiful. All right, well, that's page 109, I believe. And let me take a look here. we'll sing just the first and last verse. You can remain seated. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Let's try verse 3. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Amen. Isn't that a comforting thought? Well, let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 27. Talk a little bit about that. I was thinking about that, the idea of how his mercies fail not, and one of those times I was filling in for Dennis in their Sunday school. I remember going over some verses in Psalm 119. I gave the folks some of my favorite verses out of Psalm 119. And I'm going to read you one of them here in a minute. That is, if I can find it. This is Psalm 119, 132. It says, Look thou upon me, and be merciful unto me, as thou usedst to do unto those that love thy name. You ever think about when things are going kind of difficult, and you say, Lord, could you just give me some mercy like you used to do? That'd be a blessing. And that's what David wrote. He says, as thou usest to do unto those that love thy name. Well, anyway, the Lord sure is good about giving us his mercy, no doubt about that. So we're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 27. And we never did read through this. Let's read through this chapter and I'll give you a couple thoughts. So this is when David, last week I started out by saying David was discouraged, and I'll hit on that again, but I re-outlined this thing and I put down David's desertion. So he kind of deserts his own people here, at least his own land, and he goes across the border, if you will, into the land of the enemy. So chapter 27, verse 1, and David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. So we talked about that. I'll talk some more about that in a minute. And then verse 2, and David arose, and he passed over with the 600 men that were with him unto Achish, the son of Maoch, the king of Gath. So wherever David's going, he's taking 600 people with him, and that's just that's the men. So there would have probably been women, and there could have been children, whatever. I was reading earlier today that in 1 Samuel 22, I don't want to get bogged down, but in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1, it says, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam, when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down there with him, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves, remember, and he became a captain over them, and there was about 400 at that point. This is 1 Samuel 22. It goes on to say that David drops his father and mother off in Moab. Remember we talked about that? But not his brethren. So here David goes over to the Philistines, and who's he dragging with him? His brothers. We ought to think about that. You know, sometimes our decisions are going to impact and influence and make an imprint on somebody else. And I thoroughly believe, you know, David's, I think some of his brothers are with him. And that's kind of sad. Well, anyway, so verse 3, and David dwelt with Achish at Gath. And remember I told you, remember Goliath was from Gath, so that was like the arch enemies. And he and his men, and every man with his household, even David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife. And it was told Saul that David was fled to Gath, and he sought no more again for him. So, you know, I'm assuming Saul, now that he knows that David's down in the land or the area of the Philistines, he's like, you know, he's not a threat to me now. Maybe. So, verse 5, and David said unto Achish, if I have now found grace in thine eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there, for why should thy servant dwell in the royal city with thee? Then Achish gave him Ziklag that day, wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. And the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. So, you know, somebody would ask, well, why did the king of Gath, Achish, why did he give David a city? Well, I think I mentioned this last week. There was this, I guess there was a custom or whatever, there was a practice back in those days of hiring mercenaries. So that, you know, if a country was under siege, they might hire another country to come in and help them. And so when David shows up this second time, you remember the first time he showed up, he played the fool like he was a madman, and then he left. Well, he didn't have 400 men with him then. Now he has 600 men. And so many believe that when David shows up at Achish with this entourage of 600 soldiers, that Achish looks at him and says, you know, I can get some benefit out of this. And so, and you'll see as we keep reading, that could be the case, that Achish was going to use David to kind of be a mercenary. Now think about that. You know what a mercenary is. Okay, they're hired killers. That's what they are. These guys that talk about, well, this is God's will for David to go down into the Philistines. Really? To be a hired killer? I mean, it's just odd how some people view the Bible, as if David couldn't make a mistake. He made a mistake. This is not God's will. Well, anyway, so he gave him Ziklag, and he stayed there 16 months. Yeah, 16 months. I wrote down, where is it that I wrote that down? And I wrote it down, and you've heard that. The saying, and I'm going to get it. Sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. 16 months. That's a long. That's a pretty good little clip of time. And well, anyway, we're gonna see some stuff about that. So he's down there 16 months. And verse number 8, and David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Gezerites and the Amalekites. For those nations were of old the inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even unto the land of Egypt. And David smote the land and left neither man, now look at this, left neither man nor woman alive. And took away the sheep and the oxen and the asses and the camels and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. And Achish said, whither have you made a road today? And David said, against the south of Judah. Okay, that's a lie. He wasn't in southern Judah. He was attacking Achish's allies. All of these guys mentioned, the Gezrites, the Geshurites, and the Amalekites. Those were all the enemies of the children of Israel. And I never did see that before because I never really did study this out much. But here's the idea. In David's desertion from his land, the very first thing that he does is start practicing deception. He's telling Achish that he's actually attacking southern Judah cities, cities in southern Judah, which would be the Israelites, the people of God. And he says, I'm going down there and destroying them. But notice that he doesn't leave anybody alive. Verse 11, David saved neither man nor woman alive to bring tidings to Gath, saying, lest they should tell on us, saying, so did David, and so will be his manner all the while he dwells in the country of the Philistines. And Achish believed David, saying, he hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. So David here is practicing deception, and he's counting on that Achish doesn't get the truth. Because if Achish gets the truth, David is getting the axe. I mean, that's just the way it's going to work. David is weakening Achish's military strength by what he's doing. And he's doing it in a way that is merciless. I mean, he's killing the men and the women so they can't send anybody out to tell him what he's doing. Now, when it says in verse number 12, and Achish believed David, okay, saying he made his people Israel, I think he believed David, but I also think, any wise leader, because he doesn't know firsthand what David's doing, he might have believed him, but he might have had some questions. And the reason I say that's because what's coming up. But I just want to show you that David, remember before I move into chapter 28, just want to give you a couple of thoughts here quickly. And I said this last week, and I'm just going to say it again, just so we don't miss this. David, in verse number 1 of chapter 27, David said in his heart, I shall not perish one day by the hand of Saul. David was listening to the wrong person. Remember, we talked about that. And just to remind you, listen, Proverbs 28:26, he that trusteth in his own heart is a fool, but whoso walks wisely, he shall be delivered. I was reading a sermon by, his name escapes me at all maybe it'll come sometime. He says this, when David communed within his own heart, he immediately forgot all the great promises which the Lord had made unto him. Because David listened to his heart, he chose to abandon the path of life that God had placed on him years before. He decided he would be better off fleeing to the land of the Philistines, where he thought he would be safe from King Saul. Imagine the future king of Israel running to the arch enemies of God for help. That's the kind of trouble David's heart got him into. And he continues and he says this, beware of trusting your own heart. When we consult our heart, we are getting in touch with our human nature. Our old human nature is fallen, and it always looks at things from an earthly level. When people say stuff like, well, I just felt it in my heart, they're usually headed for trouble. That's why the Bible cautions us against trusting our heart. Jeremiah 17:9, Proverbs 28:26, which we just read. When you talk to yourself, be sure to talk to yourself about the things of God. When someone says to you, just listen to what your heart's telling you, they have given you advice that can lead to spiritual wreck and ruin if you are foolish enough to follow it. Now let me just insert this here. And I was reading today and as I was studying, do you remember that book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Does anybody remember that book? It was very popular back in, 2000s maybe, or early 90s maybe, some 90s. The guy who wrote that, if you don't know, he was a pastor of a mega church, which he became the pastor at age 30. And I think he wrote that book when he was maybe 21. Very popular, sold over 1 million copies. And it basically was promoting the idea of courting instead of dating. Well, later in his life, this guy, he completely rejected his faith. Now, he was a pastor over thousands of people. And he has since then, I mean, you can Google it and all that stuff, but he has since then stopped the production of that book, and there's no more copies. You can't buy it new or anything like that. But he kind of came to the conclusion that, you know, what he was following just didn't set well within himself as far as his Christian faith. And his wife, she has a blog, and I read it today, and she basically said the same thing, that she was robbing herself. Her faith was kind of robbing her of what she thought she could become. Now, I want to tell you something. Listen, folks, that is a lie from the devil, okay? I've been there about what I wanted to do, and let me tell you where it ends up. It ends up in the wrong place. It does not end up in the right place. And you know, I thought about all of the people that read that book. And I remember there was people in my church in South Carolina that had read it, and they were all fired up about it. If they know now that that guy, he has denounced it all. He says he's not even a Christian now. He says, I'm not a Christian. I don't consider myself a Christian. And I thought about that. You know, when we listen, your heart's deceptive. When God's Word tells us to do something and it doesn't feel right in our heart, that's because our heart is wicked. If God says to forgive somebody who's hurt you and you're like, I've forgiven that rascal, you know what? The Lord wants you to forgive. Now, it may not feel right. I'm going to tell you, I don't know how many times I've had to tell people I'm sorry that hurt me, and they never say a word. They never say back, well, I'm sorry too for what I did to you. It hasn't happened. But you know what? In our hearts, we have to be willing to forgive. But my point is this, our heart can be very dangerous. And if we're not careful, well, I mean, just think about it. David's heart led him. He decided, his heart was telling him, hey, God can't provide. Remember, he went to Nabal because he needed some food for his troops. God can't provide, so I need to go over here to the Philistines and have the devil provide. That is a lie. And you know, as I thought about this passage today, I just thought about this. Did David consider the cost he was going to have to pay for what he did? And I don't think he did, and you're going to see that in a minute. But anyway, he listened to the wrong person. And we just need to be careful that we are not listening to ourselves, because ourselves will lie to us. Yourself will tell you that you're never going to get out of this. There's no way out. God's forgotten you, whatever. That's a lie. And then we talked about last week, just quickly, we said that he forgot about all of God's promises. I could preach the whole message on this again, because when just go to chapter 28, and I want to show you something. And look at verse 1. And it came to pass in those days, and these are the days when David's at Ziklag, that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish says unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. Now let me put it in our language today. Here's what he says. You do understand that you and your men are going to fight the Israelites. That's why I think when it says he believed David up in the previous verse, I'm thinking he might have believed him, but he might have had some questions. Because really, when you read this in the way that it flows like this. You do get it that you're coming out to fight against Israel. You know where you came from? You do understand that, right? And I mean, you would think David wouldn't have been standing there scratching his head like, well, I guess I'm going to have to, you know. I mean, surely he had to think about that. Because look at David's response. And verse number 2, and David said to Achish, surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. Now, he doesn't really know what his servant can do. David calls himself his servant because he hasn't seen him, but he's heard of all this stuff that David's done, and he's brought him some spoils and stuff. But look what else it says. And Achish says to David, therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. The keeper of mine head, guys and ladies, is his personal bodyguard. I'm going to make him my bodyguard forever. You know, when I thought about this, back to God's promises, God had promised to provide, promised a position, promised a plan for David, gave him a purpose, had this all worked out for David, and David at this time is running. And now Achish has become David's authority. Now Achish tells David, oh, by the way, you do know we're going to battle next week and you're coming, right? You don't have any option. And I bet David was like, wait a minute, what's happened here? I used to be my own, you know, I used to be under the authority of the Lord. No, now you're under the authority of the devil. See, his authority changed. I'm telling you, listen to me, I've seen Christians decide they're going to go the wrong way, and you know what happens? They wake up and realize the devil's a little more powerful than I thought. The devil's requiring me to do something I didn't think I wanted to do. He wants me to go a place I don't want to go. He wants me to be something I want to be. And David here is now under the authority of the enemy of God. That's where I used to be. I was under the authority of the devil before I got saved. I was under his command and his control. I was under his kingdom, if you will. And then God saved me, and the Bible says, translated us out of the darkness into the light of his dear Son. I don't want to go back there. And David now has a different authority. You know what's interesting? Not only this authority that David now is under has a different priority for David. Now, I want you to just think with me for a minute. David's forgotten all about the promises of God. Remember I told you last week, when you get discouraged because it doesn't work out and you get worn out trying to make it work out, and you get washed out of all the goodness of God because He's failed you because you did this and God didn't fix it. You become so discouraged. You go to the enemy, and just stay with me here. The enemy has a plan for you. Just like God has a plan for you. The enemy has a plan. Now listen, do you know what Achish's plan was? To destroy the people of God. That's the plan. Now, if you're born again, listen, and you give up on the promises and the purposes and the place that God has for you, and the devil becomes your authority, then let me tell you, his priority for you is to turn and start destroying the work of God. And I've seen it. I've seen people turn on their church, on their preacher, on their I've seen it. Can you believe that David would give up being the king of the people of God to be the armor bearer of an enemy king? It's unbelievable. That's the deceitfulness of our hearts. Achish's priority for David was this, guys and ladies. Now, I'm not making this up. I want you to take your men and go attack your family. Your cousins, your uncles, your aunts. those boys you grew up with in Bethlehem that are now marching with Saul, I want you to go raise your swords and your shields and your spears, and I want you to go destroy them. And I bet David was saying, what in the world have I got myself into? You do know we're going to battle and you're coming, right, David? And David says, surely. You know, somebody translated that, great, as if David's happy about it. He's not happy, I don't think. But he's wondering, what in the world am I going to do? The priority of the enemy is to destroy the people of God. And you know what? He does a pretty good job of it. Sometimes he uses our own family to so discourage us. So, to so turn on us. Yeah, isn't it amazing how the devil works? I want to show you one more thing, though. I want you to look at verse number 12. Verse 28, chapter 28, and verse number 2. This is 1 Samuel 28:2. And David said to Achish, surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish says to David, therefore I will make thee. Wait a minute. I've got a different purpose now. I got a different position. You're not the king anymore. Now you're my armor bearer or my bodyguard. I'll make thee. Jesus said in Matthew 4 to the Peter and the fisherman, he says, follow me and I will make thee. Now Achish, the devil, the enemy, looks at David and says, I'll make thee. I'm going to make you my armor bearer, but I want you to look at the time frame. I'll make thee keeper of mine head for how long? Forever. The devil, listen, the devil wants to ruin you permanently. He doesn't want you going back to what God's called you to do. To participate in the place that He created you, the position, the purpose, His overall plan. He doesn't, the enemy doesn't want you there. He wants you back, destroying the people of God forever. I thought about that when I read about that guy who had denounced his faith. And I'm sure, and I feel, I feel bad that whatever happened that brought him to that point, but I just, and I think he knows this, how many people he has wounded in the Christian faith by doing that. How many people he's turned away in the secular world because he was this big Christian and now he's denounced it all. That's exactly what the devil wants you to do. It's exactly his plan. I'll make you, David. David, you were going to be the king and you can sleep in a palace and you can make all the rules, but now, you know what? You can be my bodyguard. How about that? I'll keep you out in the doghouse in the back, feed you some dog food every once in a while. Well, that sounds wonderful. Amen. So, David listened to the wrong person. He forgot God's promises, and he lost all of his peace. Now, I would just say this, guys and ladies. Do you think that David was prepared for what the enemy was asking him to do? No. He didn't know. He did. I don't think he was. I don't think he would know. Do you think David was persuaded that this was the right thing to do? I don't think so. I heard a message this week by a fellow, though, and he said, and I want to show you this. I want you to go to Matthew chapter 16 quickly. Matthew 16, and I want to show you something there. And look down at verse number 13. Matthew 16:13, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said, but whom ye say that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter is right on the money. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he his disciples they should tell no man that he was Jesus Christ. And from that time forth began Jesus showing to his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. So Peter said this, Lord, I don't want you to go to the cross. Peter didn't understand. Look at the Lord's response. He turned and said unto Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those things that be of men. My point is this, guys and ladies. Just a few moments before he says this, he was filled with the Spirit of God, and he declared, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, you're right on. And within just a few moments, he says, and Christ says, you know what? Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of God, tells him, I got to go to the cross. And Peter says, ain't happening. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to let that happen. And Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, you're acting like Satan. You see how quick that happens? In a moment, he's filled with the Spirit of God, and in the next moment, he's filled with Satan. You say, poor old David made some bad decisions. I want to tell you, I see David in me all the time. I can be full of the Spirit of God and somebody pull out in front of me and I have to honk at him, and all of a sudden I'm filled with Satan. That's just the truth. So my point is this, guys and ladies, the best of us make bad decisions. What do we do with those decisions? Do we continue in that, or do we get out? Poor old David here, I don't know what he was thinking, but if it wouldn't have been for the divine intervention of a merciful, faithful God, he would have ruined himself. But God did intervene. And let me give you this, guys and ladies. And I know I'm almost out of time, but I want to leave you with this thought. If you ever think that it would be better just to go back like you were, okay, than where you are now, I want to just remind you of this. Listen to me. The devil will take more from you than you can ever imagine. And I want to prove that to you. I want to show you. I want you to go to 1 Kings chapter 20. We'll end with this. I got about 3 minutes, and I'm going to show you this. 1 Kings chapter 20. And you remember this story. It's about Ahab. Look at verse number 1 of 1 Kings 20. And Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathered all his hosts together, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots, and he went up and besieged Samaria and warred against it. This is verse 2, 1 Kings 20, verse 2. And he sent messengers to Ahab, king of Israel, in the city, and said unto him, thus saith Ben-Hadad, thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives also and thy children, even the goodliest are mine. Now that's what the enemy sent to Ahab and said, you know what? Your gold, your silver, your wives, your kids, and any of your servants that are good, they're all mine. That's what the enemy's telling Ahab. And look at Ahab's response. Verse 4, and the king of Israel answered, my lord, O king, according to thy saying, I am thine and all that I have. Hey, it's all yours, Ben-Hadad. It's all yours. Now, Ben-Hadad is a picture of the enemy, the devil. Okay, let's keep reading. Verse 5, and the messenger came again and said, thus speaketh Ben-Hadad, saying, although although I sent unto you saying that thou shalt deliver me thy silver and thy gold and thy wives and thy children, yet I'm going to send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time, and they'll search your house and the houses of thy servants, and it shall be that whatsoever is pleasant in thine eyes, whatsoever is pleasant in your eyes, Ahab, whatever is pleasing to you, look what he says, they shall put it in their hand and take it away. Now, I want you to chew on that a little bit, because here's what the devil's saying. You know what? You're going to come over to my side. I'm going to take your gold, your silver, your wives, your kids, and all of those the people around you that you love. I'm going to take them away from you. But I'm not stopping there. You say, well, I surrender. You can have my kids. There's so many families today that have surrendered their kids to the devil. Unbelievable. God help us. Listen, we're so interested in living in big homes and driving fancy cars that we can't properly educate our children in the things of God. Well, that was for free. Anyway, Ben-Hadad says this. I'm going to take all that stuff, but I'm not stopping there. Whatever is left that still pleases you, I'm removing that too. I'm going to tell you, the devil does not stop when you're defeated. He stops when you're destroyed. When you have nothing left, your family's gone, your kids forsaken you, nothing left. And he says this, hey, now you're right where I want you. You're defeated. You're a disaster. You're a joke to the world. Now I'll leave you alone as you wallow in your pity. Well, you know what? If it wasn't but for the grace of God, that would happen to many of us. And David experienced that grace. You know the story, and I don't have time. I'm out of time. But if you keep reading in 1 Kings 20, you'll see that not only does the enemy demand more than we want, that we want to give, but he's dedicating to getting it. Ahab says this, well, listen, I'll give you my wives and my kids and all that, but I ain't giving you everything else. And I want you to look at what Ben-Hadad says. If you're still back in 1 Kings 20, look what he says in verse number 11. Verse 10, and Ben-Hadad sent unto him and said this, the gods do so unto me and more, if the dust of Samaria shall suffice for handfuls for all the people that follow me. You know what he's saying there? I'm going to destroy you, Ahab. That's what's going to happen to you. And you know what I wrote just in my notes? The devil, listen, and you get a hold of this because it's the truth. The devil is willing to fight to destroy you. But he that is within us is greater than he that's in the world. Hey, listen, I don't want to go back to the world. And you can turn the video off if you want or not, but I'm going to tell you that. That's why I don't want this church. Looking like a bar room. Sounding like a bar room. I came out of a bar room. Walked in and had all the music blaring and everything was dark. That's not the church of God. It's just not. I don't care how they paint it. I don't care how they prop it up. That's not the church of God. God's church is a called out assembly that's holy. It's not from hell. And I know there's people who disagree, and I get that. I understand that. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to go back to a barroom setting and call that the church. It ain't right. I'm telling you, it's not right. God's people are a holy nation, a peculiar people, called out to show the light of His glorious gospel. But boy, we're not that. I'm telling you, there's so many not like that now. I don't know, people laugh at me and they say, oh, you just know tomato-faced red. I don't care what you say. I ain't going back to the world. I've been there. I had enough of it. God saved me out of it by the grace of God. Well, that was for free too. The enemy wants to destroy you. And poor old David, I'm right there with you, King. And if it wasn't for the grace of God, David literally would have ruined his life. But by the grace and mercy of God. And the